today. With that, I'm going to talk about voting impact and the novelty. And this is a little bit of a different talk about talking about the impact of research. I would like today to talk about the research on impact, okay? And I'm going to talk about some long-standing challenge on that, which is how to measure impact and also how to foster it. And where could I find better inspiration about impact than actually Dirk? And since I started working with him in 2014, it has been actually very inspiring for me, but also for the people I work with, to think about interdisciplinary research with a high impact. So I would like to thank very much Dirk for that, actually shaping a little bit my frame of thinking and my career on that. And I will start my talk actually on impact. Yeah, by talking actually, the notion of impact that I'm going to talk about today is actually the expected gain that we can see on actually voting outcomes, okay, in society, in the broader society. And we can see these actually broader gains in elections in terms of the agendas and the priorities of the candidates, but also actually on another type of collective decision-making, which is participatory budgeting, okay? And which is about actually selecting projects that can make impact in society. And I'm going to focus mainly on participatory budgeting, although what I'm going to talk today has a broader actually applicability on any type of voting scenario. So for you that who may not know what is participatory budgeting, it's actually a bottom-up way for to distribute a public budget by involving citizens in proposing ideas, voting for them, and often even implementing these ideas. So as Cesar said before, this is very interesting, right? When we talk about impact, is especially impact of voting outcomes, right? It's mainly the debate is about ideological or even like highly polarized political arguments around that, right? So in terms of impact, we lose actually the opportunity to really see a more rigorous and systematic assessment of what is impact and how to measure it. And if we see particularly policies like decarbonization and net zero, we see how important it is, like for instance, meeting net zero targets by 2050 and how the voting outcomes, the decisions we make about how to invest influence the impact creation. And voting impact has been so far totally underexplored in terms of especially social choice theory, although actually we see that the design of voting in terms of which voting methods we use and which ballot aggregation methods we employ actually determine the outcomes. So if they determine the outcomes, then they determine the impact. And we have different methods to employ to elect winners, which means actually that they affect the impact. And what I'm going to look today is how proportional methods that promote the proportionality actually affect this impact. And I will start with some motivation from real world and some work we did recently in the city of Aarau in Switzerland. So together with the teams of Dirk and Regula, we ran actually a democratic innovation in the city of Aarau, where actually the citizens employed their ideas. They proposed more than 33 ideas, as you see here, for projects to implement that cover a broad range of impact areas. And actually, if you see here carefully, this is actually how the projects score. And if we use the mainstream method, the method that has been used actually in the past all over the world in participatory budgeting, that would be actually the winners, the results of these elections. We will have actually 7 winners and 26 losers, okay? Which is actually disappointing, right? So we wanted to do something different than this, and we employed an alternative, actually, voting aggregation method that provides more proportional representation of the preferences of the citizens, and this is the method of equal shares. Without going into the details how this method works, you can see already in the voting outcomes the difference it can make, right? So we have 17 winners instead of 7, and we have a much better representation both of the voter preferences, but also of the project ideas. And it has some special characteristics, right? So you see there are many new novel projects in the sense that, you know, they are winning here, but they wouldn't win in the standard utilitarian greedy method. But there is also another interesting observation that I would like to make. So there is one project, this project, the Wild Bees Paradise project, which received a lot of votes, actually. It was a top 3 project, but it was not elected in this election, with this voting aggregation rule. So this is an exclusive, actually, popular loser. And you may wonder, actually, why this happened and how this actually expensive project allowed actually to have all these new novel projects elected instead. Okay, so is this an artifact of this election, or it's something like more general behind this? So that's what we want to investigate there. So we went beyond now Arau, and we look actually, we made the largest actually analysis of participatory budgeting elections. And we wanted to see exactly what if this effect manifests in a broader sense. So what you see here is results for utilitarian, greedy, and equal shares, and the popularity, the top 20 most popular projects, and how actually likely is they are selected in terms also of the cost of these top 20 popular projects, and how likely is they are selected with the 2 methods, okay? So you see actually, first of all, 2 observations here, that the top actually 3 most popular projects are also the most expensive projects, okay? So people actually vote for expensive projects. But also you see here this interesting tipping point. With methods that promote fairness or proportionality, the top 3 popular and expensive projects are sacrificed, right? To elect instead actually many more actually projects that are lower in cost, okay? So actually this creates very different dynamics in terms of impact creation, and that's actually what we wanted to investigate and unravel actually in more detail. So we wanted to introduce a new framework to actually capture these different dynamics in elections. And at this moment, we are looking at the anticipated impact creation in terms of, you know, the different impact areas that a project will be implemented, and also the different beneficiaries that are related with these projects. And we can actually, what we do here to measure the impact is that we compare the voting outcomes of the 2 methods, of the 2 voting methods. And if we compare them simply, we can measure the impact. And if we can look the exclusive winners of each of these methods, we can measure novelty. And we introduce a framework that is based on these 3 pillars, okay? So 2 levels of measurement at the voting outcome, but also at the ballot level. We also have 3 metrics to capture impact. And also we have 3 units of measurements, which is about the cost, the number of projects, and the popularity. And I will give you an illustrative example to show you a little bit what this impact framework captures, okay? So we have these 3 metrics, and I will show you an illustrative example with a simple committee election. So you see here, for instance, we have this committee elected with, for instance, 2 women and 2 men. So if we look the measure of share, we have a good gender balance. But actually, if we look how many candidates there were in these elections, there was actually one more women candidate that was not elected, which actually shows that in these elections the women were underrepresented, okay, in terms of how many candidates there were. And if we combine actually the winners and also the proposed candidates, we can actually derive which different impact areas, which different beneficiaries are underrepresented or overrepresented. That's actually what we want to capture with this framework. And now in terms of novelty, I distinguish here 2 notions of novelty when I compare the outcomes. the between novelty, which is the exclusive winners of an impact area X out of all exclusive winners. And we also introduce the within novelty, which is the same, like exclusive winners of impact area X, but out of all winners of impact area X, okay? So this is how we distinguish the two notions of novelty. And now I'm going to show you a bit some insights from the analysis of applying this framework to a large number of elections, okay, from the Publib. So what I show you here is actually the different elections, different voting instances, and we sort these instances according to the impact loss that we observe for actually equal shares. So the difference between the utilitarian greedy and the equal shares. And the way you can read this actually plots is actually by looking at the frequency of impact loss, as you see there, the mean impact loss, the mean positive and mean negative impact loss. And these are the four metrics for cost and for number for the share. And I show you here the share and the representation. So what do we find out here? First of all, we have a more frequent impact loss by equal shares on areas such as public space, urban greenery, and environment. But we have larger magnitudes of impact gain for areas such as welfare, culture, and education. Okay? So there is a difference, right? So there is a difference in terms of which areas are advantaged and which are disadvantaged. Now, if we go to the proportionality, which combines the insights of winners and candidates, then here we can find out which areas are actually over or underrepresented. So what we see is that in terms of the equal shares, we have the education and the culture, which are areas with impact gain that are overrepresented. And respectively, we have areas with impact loss, such as the public transit, that are underrepresented by equal shares. And we can look also the representation of utilitarian greedy. And what we see here is that we have an overrepresentation of the public space, also the urban greenery and the environmental protection, and underrepresentation for welfare, okay? So it seems that actually there is a clear trade-off between these two methods, right? The one method kind of prioritize the welfare education projects, but the other one actually prioritize projects related to sustainability and the environment. And now if we actually look the novelty, and novelty again, you know, we distinguish the two notions of novelty here, between novelty, where we compare out of all exclusive winners versus all winners of an impact area X. We see actually that we have a large within novelty gain in all impact areas for actually within novelty, between novelty. And this means actually we have many new unseen projects that are selected across all these areas. But if we look the between novelty here, then we have impact gain areas in we have novelty gain in areas where we have impact gain, for instance, the education, the culture, and the welfare, but we have impact loss in all other areas where we also observe an impact loss. Okay. So far, actually, we have seen these results, and what we can learn actually is that these kind of insights show us that the cost plays a very key role here, the cost of the projects. And because of that, we want actually to investigate this further, and we want to actually control for the cost of the projects. And we see actually whether it's not maybe the impact areas, but it's also like the interplay of which impact areas and what cost actually that create the voting outcomes. So how to study that? We control for the cost by looking at each election and deriving actually 4 cost quartiles. And we see actually whether how the different representation of the impact areas goes across the different costs. You see very cheap to very expensive projects, and we look again the impact loss. So one thing we learn here is that the impact loss originates from actually both high and low cost projects. As you see here, public transit projects are actually, the impact loss comes mainly from expensive projects, but public space, urban greener environment can also originate from low cost projects. And sport is special because we can observe both impact gain and impact loss for different cost levels. As you see, we have an impact gain for middle cost projects for sport, but an impact loss for high cost projects. And in terms of the representation, we see clearly in the representation that high cost means impact loss, right? So clearly we see that the cost plays a key role on underrepresenting some, actually almost all of the impact areas. Now, this is observations, and we want to see whether there is some kind of causal explanation of all these findings about the impact loss. And what we did here is we wanted to see which of these impact areas explain the utilization of the budget that in which the allocation is happening. So for this, actually, we conducted a choice-based conjoint analysis where we can causally derive which of these factors, which of these features, in this case, the impact areas, explain the budget utilization. And for that, we have a dependent variable we want to predict, which is the budget utilization. And we have the independent variables, which is the most frequent mutually exclusive impact areas. So we take the very popular areas there, okay, as you see, combinations of them. So it's a project that is about culture and education, for instance. And also we segregate based on different cost levels. And now we want to see which are the most important factors. So this is derived from part-worth utilities analysis. And you see here the different features, the different independent variables, the impact areas, the combination of impact areas, and the relative importance on predicting the dependent variable, the budget utilization. And what we see here is that low-cost projects that explain the budget utilization come with very high importance, and especially for culture education, health public space, and also public space and transit on these combinations. And we also see that projects, regardless of the cost, actually, that explain the budget utilization of utilitarian grid fall into environmental protection and urban greenery and public space. So that means actually that it is the utilitarian grid that explains better the budget utilization for this type of impact areas. And we can see this also now causally. Okay, so I showed these results, and you may also wonder that, okay, is this happening really in real world, right? We don't have evidence because the application of the methods so far was hypothetical. In the past, for the past data, we have only the utilitarian grid, okay? We don't have actual data from applying the method of equal shares. We hypothetically applied it. And what is the point here, right? So if in real world we apply a method, okay, then we may have different proposed projects. We may have projects with different costs, and maybe we even have different voting behavior, right? So we want actually to see here whether this impact loss and these impact gains that we observe are likely to happen, or even they may be mitigated in reality. So we don't have a lot of data for that, but we took two use cases, two case studies here in real world, the city idea in Arao. And this campaign actually focuses on generic projects. Usually the projects are low cost because the budget was pretty low. And the projects are mainly focused on welfare. And we have another actually use case, the Green Million, which is a very different actually campaign because the budget is larger, and this campaign focuses actually on green projects. Okay, so that makes particularly interesting because we saw that equal shares underrepresents such green projects. So if we look at the data, and you see here the the average of all these 400 past elections and where actually these two case studies fall, we actually observe that the impact loss can be mitigated. It's actually mitigated in real world, especially for the Green Million, right? Because it focuses really on projects related to sustainability. And we also see that we may have actually impact loss. So we may have compromise of the impact in practice, but of course, further evidence is needed on that. But in overall, we did see that over all these metrics of the framework, we see some mitigation. So there's still impact loss, but we see some mitigation of this impact loss. Okay, so some reflections and some lessons learned for discussion. And what we learned from this study is that the fair collective choice may disadvantage expensive infrastructure and sustainable development projects, but also can promote low-cost projects on alternative areas such as welfare, education, and culture, which are usually not promoted in participatory budgeting campaigns. So there are some implications of that, right? So there is a potential risk for a democratic deficit on this type of projects, for instance, tackling climate change and meeting net zero targets, in addressing these kind of needs in a bottom-up way, right? So the risk of top-down planning and budget allocation is significant here because it may yield to illegitimate implementations, corruption, or even greenwashing, right? So we need kind of to preserve the capacity of participatory budgeting and participatory initiatives in general to address these needs of sustainable development and net zero. So what these findings suggest, okay, and maybe what is kind of the policy implications of this work is that what we can do is maybe break down large projects, right, into smaller ones that we can actually implement incrementally, right? Let's say a network of bike lanes, right? Why not, instead of having a very large multi-million project, why not breaking down to smaller localized projects with a local impact and incrementally build it up, you know, over time. So that would be maybe a more legitimate and also a way to foster this type of expensive projects. And also, I think that this type of impact assessment could be very useful on assessing political agendas of candidates in elections in a more rigorous and systematic way. And I think that there is a lot of actually to learn on other type of elections from that. So thank you very much, and I'm glad to receive any questions. Thank you.